The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
You're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome, everyone, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. Today is Thursday, February 1st, 2018, the first day of Black History Month. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. I want to begin with the Nunes Memo. The most important part of the State of the Union address actually had nothing to do whatsoever with what the president said from behind the podium. But take a listen to this report about what the president said as he left the podium after he gave the State of the Union address.
Moments after his speech, President Trump told a House Republican he would release a classified memo alleging surveillance abuses by the FBI and Department of Justice.
President, let's release the memo. Oh, yeah. Oh, don't worry. 100%. Can you imagine that? Yes, sir.
And as of last night, Representative Adam Schiff, who is the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, has let it be known that Nunes and his staffers have made material changes to the memo that they presented to the White House, that the White House is making their decision on whether or not to release. Now, let's be sure, the White House, as we just heard in that clip of Donald Trump at the State of the Union, they're going to release this memo, and it's guaranteed that this memo is going to be highly cherry-picked, highly taken out of context for the purposes of protecting the President of the United States. Devin Nunes is the most loyal sycophant of Donald Trump. He has proven above and beyond anything else he is willing to defend the president at all costs, and he is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. It is his staff that wrote this memo, and now they've made material changes. Of course, the committee has said, well, the changes that were made were minor and just for editing purposes. Adam Schiff believes that these changes that were made, that were presented to the White House on yesterday, were material changes, and so it remains to be seen. But we do know that before probably the end of today, we will all have a chance to look at this memo. The problem is this. Michael Tracy, who's of several organizations, I think last he was with the Young Turks, he asked the question, well, if everyone suspects that this memo is going to be cherry-picked and erroneous, et cetera, then why wouldn't we just let them release it so we can prove it? Well, the problem is this, is that it does not require a truthful statement for the machine, the conservative media machine, to kick into high gear and to take an erroneous, fallacious, propagandistic statement and use that to drive the narrative that would undermine the FBI's investigation or the Department of Justice investigation into alleged collusion and obstruction of justice. Right. So it's not, they can take look at how much damage they've done just with the specter of a memo. They have done a full court press. They've done everything they possibly could to undermine this investigation. And so they don't even need a truthful statement. Do we honestly believe that Fox News, Sean Hannity, is going to take a look at this memo and look at it objectively and say, this was taken out of context? And we won't even be able to demonstrate that it was taken out of context because we're not going to have access to the underlying intelligence that was gathered around it, nor will we have access to the Democratic version of their memo from the House Intelligence Committee that is based on the underlying intelligence. And so this document getting into the public sphere has nothing to do with concerns about the FBI per se. It has everything to do with concerns of the propagandistic machine that conservative media has already in place, and their ability to take a fallacious and erroneous and propagandistic memo and use it to destroy the investigation into President Trump. Period. And so actually I am for it. You know, I'm still, in spite of all that, despite of all that, I'm still for them releasing the memo. You know why? Because we've just got to go through this. It's like having a virus. You know, it's like being sick, you know, that there's no antibiotics that's going to fix it. You just got to go through it. This propaganda machine that has been built by the Republican Party, this disease of hyperpartisanship, the sycophant mentality of Devin Nunes and the House Intelligence Committee. This is just a sickness that we're going to have to fight our way through. We cannot protect the United States from this. We cannot protect the United States from the propaganda. We have to just get into the trenches. And by the trenches, I mean into the media, using our platforms to fight back against it, social media, conversations with your family and your friends. It really is going to require that we just fight this tooth and nail. Let them release it. Let it come, let it fall, let it all out. Fine, let it all out. You know why? Because not releasing it is going to, they're in a perfect position here. Not releasing it is going to strengthen their argument that there's something wrong and something mysteriously deep and dark about the deep state at the FBI. So they can use that narrative. If they release it, then they're going to have propaganda that is cherry picked, right? So it's a win-win for Republicans here. And the only way that we stand a chance of actually fighting back against this virus that has infected the United States of America is if we get into the swamp with them and go item by item, lie by lie, half truth by half truth, and counter this misleading narrative or every misleading narrative that they push on America. So yesterday I did some coverage on Joe Kennedy III, grandson of Robert Kennedy, former Attorney General. And we got a lot of different responses, reactions to it on both sides of the spectrum, positive and negative. Some people think I gave him too hard of a time. Other people think I didn't give him hard enough of a time. They felt like I should have gone in on him a little bit more. But I wanted to bring in Professor Matt Sienkiewicz of Boston College, associate professor there of international studies and communications. He's the author of the book, The Other Air Force, the U.S. attempts to reshape Middle Eastern media since 9/11. Professor, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing all right, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing good. And as always, I give you that formal introduction, but around here, you've been on the show so many times. I just call you Matt. Matt, you know, or you have at least met with Joe Kennedy III, Congressman Kennedy. What are some of your thoughts about him in general and his speech on the other night?
Yeah, I do have a sort of professional relationship when I've interacted with him and some people on his team. He's my congressman. I mean, that's why it's sort of why I've gotten to know him just a little bit, just as a constituent and somebody with some interests in political issues. And so, I mean, the first thing, I think he is a really sincere, smart guy. Mm-hmm. And you go in somewhat suspicious because you worry somebody with his background and sort of the privilege from which he comes, being somebody who, you won't believe is truly interested in what you have to say, or maybe is going to, be look down on you common folk. And he's not like that at all at a personal level. And when you meet with him, and I believe he's a really sincere guy. He's a very smart guy. He's a very sharp, up-to-date person. He, when you talk to him, he really does, show preparation. He shows a sincere interest in what you have to say. He's a good congressman to meet with. Okay. And that the basic thing, it's like maybe it's the least you could ask, but he definitely achieves that. And that's good, right? I've got nothing as my representative. I live in his district. I've got only good things to say about what he's been doing since he's come into office.
So let's then.
That's at the local level.
Yeah. So let's then talk about the speech, right? And some of my criticisms of him were it was extremely mechanical or almost robotic. And I'm really into public speaking and analyzing speeches. So maybe I'm coming from a jaded analysis, because I've studied speeches historically. That's just what I do. And I noticed his speech pattern. It really caught me off guard because it was too precise, and I just kind of felt it at a internal level on the night that he spoke. But then when I did the podcast yesterday and I actually looked at the waveforms, it was like it was a 1 second space exactly between every pause. And, I felt like it was too mechanical, which is not a deal breaker, right? But then the other criticism was, I just don't think he has the grit necessary to be considered as a contender for 2020 because the landscape is so different. We're not looking, the landscape does not require another Obama-esque politician. It requires a counterbalance to the oaf that Donald Trump is. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think those are both well, great things to discuss. For one, I really enjoyed you just had a tweet that had the waveform of his speech, and it's like equally spaced, little bump of speech, quiet, little bump of speech, quiet. It's actually a wonderful visualization for communication studies, and I think this is a matter of the form kind of matching the content, whether you like that or not. To me, the purpose of that response speech was to sort of stress a theme of stability, a theme of calm in the storm, of anger, but controlled anger, right? So it was there to create a juxtaposition, right? Trump is chaos, and that to me is how I read this speech. He wants to establish Trump as chaos, and if you are going to be the counterbalance to chaos, you're going to be stable. You have shown that he actually sort of literalized this in terms of like an actually sort of metered, controlled way of speaking. But that was the fundamental aspect of the response that I heard. It was a restrained speech. It was to me, it was like the rhetoric of a party which thinks they basically are okay and they maybe just did one thing wrong, right? I heard that response as the Democratic Party saying like the Clinton campaign was the problem, not the Democratic Party is the problem. And when you saw the themes that he returned to, it kind of came to that, right? He sort of was trying to get back to the Obama One America narrative, right? There's no blue and red America. You saw it sort of a callback to that. You had the sort of, I thought sort of unusual thing where he kind of just listed all the hashtags. Right. He talked Me Too. He talked Black Lives Matter. But if you think about it, that's back to the Democrats are a coalition of interests sort of a approach to what it was. To me, it was kind of like we are not going to react to this in a way that's going to let Trump control us. Right? We're going to stick to what we are. We're going to put somebody who has literally the most Democratic branded name in the world. Right. Out there to speak, and he's going to represent stability, and he's going to do it in the most controlled fashion that he possibly can. I think it's also worth noting, though, that response speech is just a terrible job to get.
Agreed. We can definitely agree there. No one has really done a great job in that spot.
Yeah, no, it's sort of like a visualization of incumbency advantage, right? You've got the president who talks obviously, and it's like perfectly lit, big space, even when people aren't clapping, it still looks good and sounds good. And then you cut to Wayne's World, right? It's like a hostage video, or sometimes it looks like Mr. Rogers who's doing the speech.
There you go.
Right? And like the lighting and this, he had a serious problem with the lighting, right? Because like the sort of moisture around his mouth got picked up by the writing the wrong way.
Yeah, I don't know if that was a lighting problem as much as a chapstick problem, but
well, it's a combination, right? The lighting was harsh though. Like it definitely was not the softest.
It wasn't the best light for him. Yeah, you're right about that. He did look a little washed out in the video for sure.
Yeah, and so I think he's there. He's trying to sort of give a sense of stability. There was a strangeness about him being the person to give the speech. I thought, it's a strange thing to hear a guy with the name of Joe Kennedy III talk about how people shouldn't be valued because of their net worth and their celebrity and their headlines and their normativity when he embodies this.
Right.
Now, I don't think that means that he can't speak to those issues, but it's like a disconnect that took place. I don't know. Those are my sort of opening thoughts.
So that I definitely agree with that. So one of the things I said yesterday is that just because he is wealthy and he's inherited his wealth doesn't disqualify him from being effective on it. I mean, we look at the perfect case study for that would be FDR, right? He embodied everything that we ostensibly dislike about the elite, and yet he did more for the working class Americans than any other president. I think, period. So that is not a disqualifying factor for me. I actually like the Kennedy brand. I'm a sucker for American history. And you can't be a fan of American history and not be a fan of our quote unquote Camelot. So the brand doesn't bother me. What bothers me, honestly, is the idea. Well, two things. One, the idea that he should be considered a contender for 2020. I think he should have more of a say about that himself. Right. I think he could probably do a lot more for himself if he would come out and either embrace it, or really, I think it would be good for him to say not yet, because I honestly just don't see him having enough grit. And maybe because his assignment, like you said, it seems as though your interpretation of his assignment was to be the calm in the storm.
Yeah.
That would be the fault of the Democratic Party telling him to write a speech like that. We're not in the calm of the storm right now. I mean, we're right on the outer edge of the most powerful portion of the storm. I mean, it's chaos right now. And I think a lot of people are looking for a fighter, not a calming voice. The calming voice right now will get steamrolled by Donald Trump. And that's not really what America, we're really crossed the Rubicon, if you ask me, in terms of our political leaders. Donald Trump did something that I think political scientists are going to have to study for the next 50 years. But he really has transformed the paradigm of what we look for in a president, not simply because, not even in a positive way, but in terms of a countervailing force to combat him. We're going to have somebody who can fight as hard as Donald Trump and be more and be intelligent at the same time. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that you're showing sort of the possibilities, and it's interesting the one that he represents. On the one hand, I mean, you want somebody who punches back.
Exactly.
Right. And I mean, I think Congressman Kennedy has at moments shown some interest in punching back. A few really wonderful little viral clips,
right.
Of him, showing some real backbone. You're right that it was. I think it was I mean, I don't know who made the decisions, obviously, but it seems like sort of a party level decision that response would not be, it was punching back, but like jabs, right? Like, sort of like pointing out little problems here, there, with the implied suggestion being that Democrats would have a solution. We're not gonna say what that is right now, but we have a solution. Here are all these problems. I think that's right. I mean, there's different lessons to learn from Trump, right? One lesson is punching is not, you got to punch hard, right? Like this is not a time for subtlety. That's one lesson. Another lesson is that you need somebody who is able to sort of grasp people's mind in terms of celebrity. And I think that's part of why the Kennedy attraction is there. I think it's strange because Congressman Kennedy is actually a pretty mild-mannered guy.
Right.
Right.
I can see
definitely, that. It's so again, if you think that I think that they might agree with you that we're in the thick of the storm. The question is, what do you do in that case? And in this case, it's find somebody who is recognizable, doesn't have a lot of baggage otherwise, which I think is one of the lessons learned. Right. The Clintons are a legacy family too, but with a much heavier sort of luggage than the Kennedys at this point, right?
Absolutely.
And Joe Kennedy III himself has very little track record, so he doesn't have any of that Clinton baggage problem. He's got a recognizability, which is good. He's shown a little interest in punching, but mostly I think he is you should like him if you think that the Democrats are basically on the right track. They just need sort of a better framing.
I love the way you did that. That is dirty as hell, Matt Sienkiewicz. Yeah. That's low key. Okay. I'm not even gonna blow your spot up right there but actually I have to. If you think the Democrats are just fine, then you should like at least Joe Kennedy's presentation on Tuesday night. That's crucial. Yeah. And I'm not talking about what he's capable of beyond that, but what you heard on Tuesday. Right. Yes. I stand by that statement. Absolutely. And this is, I think this is all the more reason why then I'm going to stand behind my criticism of him. But really, I like what you're doing here. It's not so much just a criticism of him. It has to be a criticism of the people who gave him that speech, or at least told him to write that speech and improve the speech and improve the setting and improve the tone. Because then, if that's the case, I think the Democrats don't get it. They do not get the change in America that happened when Donald Trump became president. Hell, when Donald Trump became the front runner in the Republican primary, there was a significant shift, and we're not able to go back. I don't think we can go back except we fight our way through. Maybe on the other side of Trump, post-Trump, we can get back to a more civilized conversation in the nation. I argue we probably haven't been civilized in a very long time. Before Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House, we probably were not civil. And the Democrats are longing for a more civil time. And it's like, we'll never get back to a civilized time if we are timid in this era of Trump. We've got to come out with some haymakers, just jabbing, sparring is not going to do it. We need somebody who's going to knock Donald Trump politically and rhetorically speaking the hell out.
And that's not what
that's not what the Democrats presented the other night.
No, it's as though I think that this speech, at least in not in execution, I'm sorry. I think actually, given those objectives, I thought it was actually pretty well written. But those objectives come from sort of still believing, for example, like that the polls are still important and that they are the way that should guide you. Right? It's a faith in the fact this guy is extremely unpopular. Every poll tells you he's extremely unpopular. And so part of that speech, I think, is based on a faith that will translate to election day. But we know that that's less certain these days. Right. I think it's also real faith in demographics. I mean, I think it's fantastic that the congressman speaks excellent Spanish. And I think it's perfectly appropriate to put that into the speech, and really nice that he did. But it's sort of, that move kind of shows you, all right, how are we going to win this thing? The president's unpopular and demographics are on our side. Well, that is a very old viewpoint at this point. Right. And I think if you embrace that and you look at the speech that was given, I kind of like it. But I'm not sure that I trust that the polls mean what we think they do anymore. Right. And I don't know if demographics are destiny. And in the context of voter suppression, this is like, there are all these sort of I'd like to hear him talk about voter suppression, for example, when you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
let him loose. Like, you know what? I would say if Joe Kennedy wants to be considered in the conversation for 2020, I mean, there's other things, policy issues, right? It's policy issues, his stance on marijuana. I mean, you guys are in Boston. I was in Boston. I mean, marijuana is pretty much legalized to the, recreational use. He's not in favor of it. There's some policy issues that I have with them, but nothing that is a deal breaker. So if Joe Kennedy has to be considered for 2020, then he needs to come out and represent himself and not the Democratic Party's vision of what should be done. He needs to come out and do it for himself. Yeah.
And I think I would say, and this is all speculative, but I would say his positionality, right, who he is as a Kennedy, I think it makes it hard when he's young to be that person in some ways, because he's got this whole legacy to honor.
Yeah.
But in the long run, it actually might make him a strong possibility to do that once he really is comfortable in his own skin and establishes himself. To me, the issue is that no matter what he does right now, he is still a Kennedy, and that's his number one thing on his resume, right? Is who he is. That's just, he's 37 years old. I mean, it's hard in politics to get to overcome such a legacy and make it your own in that short period of time. So at the moment, I see him being a tough candidate to be somebody who's like there to show fundamental change. That said, if he sticks around for a few, for 4 or 5 terms in Congress, and he does some stuff, he can sort of take that legacy and move it and make it his own. And I think he could actually be a real important figure. I wouldn't rush him personally to the higher level, but again,
absolutely. I don't think he is someone that should be tossed away with the bathwater of the Democratic Party. No. But I think moving him to consideration for 2020 is entirely too soon, and it doesn't resolve. It tries to recreate the magic of Obama, and it's not going to happen. I mean, that's why 2008 was magical, because how rare and how likely was that to even happen, and so we can't use the same formula. I'm going to speak more with Professor Sienkiewicz in a moment, but I want you to take a listen to this interview on CNN of about 6 evangelical voters who support Donald Trump. And if I were to be honest with you, if you've seen the video, they remind you of the Stepford wives.
A year into his presidency, and these Dallas women are still thanking God for Donald Trump.
I know that God is the one who ordained him to be in this position.
Linda Churchwell and these other ladies all voted Trump. They like his conservative beliefs.
He has appointed a conservative SCOTUS. He has stood up for pro-life. He does stand up for the freedom of religion and the freedom of churches.
Does that wipe the slate clean then for you?
Whenever anyone accepts Christ into their heart and life and asks for forgiveness of their sins and makes him Lord, everybody's slate is wiped clean.
Okay, so that's the first part. I'm going to play more in a moment. I don't know if there's even anything that needs to be said about this, except for how Christians, particularly white conservative evangelicals, this is a group of white women with one person of color, one woman of color in that group. But it's how willingly they roll out the Christian label and the forgiveness and grace of God for a Republican who has demonstrated that he actually said he has never asked for forgiveness. And so these people don't care about that. They just care that he's doing their political bidding. And I know we talk about this all the time, but it never ceases to amaze me because they looked at President Obama as if he was the Antichrist. I wish the reporter had asked them what they thought about President Obama, because they have wiped the slate clean for Donald Trump. They have rolled out the red carpet of grace and mercy for Donald Trump, despite the fact that he himself has not asked for forgiveness based on his own words. And yet they offer this forgiveness to him and still look at Barack Obama as if he was Satan's pawn. Why? Because President Obama is a Democrat. That's why. That's preeminent. That above race, above anything else, we are at such a hyper-partisan stage in society where your faith is determined in the eye of Republicans by whether or not you are a Republican.
So it's no surprise this group couldn't care less about Trump's alleged affair with porn star Stormy Daniels back in 2006.
Do you care if your president had an affair before he was president?
No. Not if it's before. His base doesn't care about that. We care about jobs. We care about the economy, safety. That's what we care about. It's not relevant.
So, I mean, I'm sorry, help me out. Was it the faith that mattered to you, or was it Republican talking points, jobs, the economy to keep you safe? You know, these are the things. This is how, if there's any reason I'm sharing this morning, it's to demonstrate just how deeply rooted Republicanism has inserted itself into religion. We always talk about religion being inserted into politics, but can you just take a step back and see how deeply rooted Republicanism has inserted itself into religion? I mean, this is what happens when you open up the door of that relationship and you break down that separation between church and state. It's not just the church influencing the state begins influencing the church. And in this case, the Republican Party has such a grip on Christianity in America that their perception of faith and salvation is based on your Republican ideology.
It doesn't matter, because that's what Christianity is about. It's all about forgiveness. It's all about new beginnings. It's all about starting over. So it is irrelevant to me about what he did in 2006.
Do you all look to your faith?
Absolutely.
Oh, the wonderful gift of forgiveness to get away with anything, right? Because that's exactly what they're saying. They're saying it doesn't matter. He's a Christian. A Christian who doesn't ask for forgiveness, but he's a Christian. He's our kind of Christian. He's not an Obama type Christian. Obama's not really a Christian. So Obama is going to always be guilty no matter what. Obama is condemned to hell. But Donald Trump, it doesn't matter if he sexually assaulted women. It doesn't matter if he grabbed them by the pussy. It doesn't matter if he never asked for forgiveness. Man, how convenient is that you can roll out the red carpet of forgiveness and grace and mercy at will as if you're God? Because if it doesn't matter for Donald Trump, then what does it matter if a woman got an abortion? What does it matter? right? So are you saying, oh, well, it doesn't matter, but they should stop having abortions? Well, the president of the United States is carrying on the same exact personality, spirit, and attitude that he has always had. Show me where Donald Trump's personality, character has changed and has demonstrated that he has turned from his ways and is now living a life of Christ. He is not. And so they don't care about what he's done, nor do they care about what he's doing that is completely counter to that of what Jesus would do. It's completely antithetical to what Jesus would do. It doesn't matter so long as he does what they want him to do as a Republican. And not to be condescending, but from the sounds of it, it doesn't even really sound like these women, or evangelicals in general for that matter, actually have a full grasp of what the president is doing. All they really have are Republican talking points. So that is enough. Not even really the depth of what the president is doing to the economy and doing through legislation, but just merely having the talking points. It doesn't matter what he's done. We love him and God has forgiven him because he's carrying out the talking points I heard on Rush Limbaugh or that I heard on Sean Hannity. Because it cannot be about Donald Trump turning from his wicked ways and his cheating life and he's become a better person. No one can say that Donald Trump has become a better person because he has become a Christian. They can't say that because he has not. His character is just as repugnant. So what is it? What is the least common denominator here? What is the common factor across the equation? It's the fact that Donald Trump is a Republican. That is who they are offering forgiveness to, a Republican. Not that they even are fully aware of what Donald Trump is doing to carry out Republican policies. He's just merely a Republican. And that is how bereft of substance white evangelical conservative Christianity has become in America. One thing that I wanted to discuss with you was this idea of leaders and figures being presented to the masses and the masses having to take it or choosing to accept that person. And the reason I ask that is because in context of Joe Kennedy, there are a lot of people who, they got viscerally upset that we even challenged the idea that he was not the one. And I'm like, well, he just got presented to you on Tuesday. Why are you so attached to him already? What do you think about that? I'm a little surprised, but I guess I shouldn't be that you got that reaction. That there is this tendency. Part of it has to do with wanting to, having a real, people want to feel represented, right? And there's different ways of being represented. One is to have real access and ability to get your voice and your ideas into circulation and to hear them and to be able to feel like you can have an impact on them. That's really hard, right? It's really hard to make a move from being, just a regular old person to somebody who sees his ideas circulating in a public space. An easier way to be represented is sort of what you might say through a feeling like an aura, like a feeling of sort of representativeness, like almost like a king has or a queen has, where they sort of stand up in front of you and you feel connected. It's not so much hearing your ideas come into dialogue with them. It's more like it sort of represents the the sense that somebody needs to sort of represent me in almost like a spiritual way. And that's the sense that I get from this. Not that Kennedy can't be articulating liberal or progressive views, but that he's not doing that yet. He's more sort of there to represent a feeling that people have, not necessarily their ideas. It might be a little abstract, but you know what I'm saying? Yeah. No, I could. And you mentioned, we talked offline about this. You mentioned Oprah Winfrey almost as an example of that. How, for a glimmering moment there, Oprah became the great hope. And she said, no, thank thank you. Thankfully, she said no thank you, because I like Oprah. I like Oprah. But if you had said something bad about Oprah in that week, you were, likely to be attacked very viscerally by people who liked Oprah before, just from her show. But then even more so by people who are like, okay, she's our knight in shining, our
knight is
heroine.
Good. No, you use the feudal metaphor, and I think that's actually good. There's an element of this that harkens back to sort of a pre-democratic era, right, where you didn't worry about the person who represented you, quote unquote, in terms of specific positions. You sort of it was more about kinship and feeling like they are a person of you who you sort of trust them, maybe even in like they're a paternal or maternal figure, right? Maybe it's more like that. It's like being represented by a mother or a father as opposed to a democratically elected person,
right? And
Oprah, sort of stood there, and that doesn't mean that people didn't like the things that she said, but it really was much more about who she was and sort of a long connection that you had with her, which was not really an intellectual one necessarily. It was very emotional. Right, and the Kennedys play that role also, right? They are paternal figures in some sense in the Democratic Party's history.
Absolutely. Well, how would you compare? What would you say would be the similarities and differences? This sounds like a question for a test. What would you say the similarities and differences are between that feudal representation that you just spoke of and how we interpret that today, almost like simply my team versus their team? Whoever is the captain of our team, that's who is our champion. How would you compare and contrast those two?
Yeah, so I mean, there's obviously a relation between those. I think that I think in some ways, by comparing it more to that feudal idea, I'm giving it a little more credit in some sense, and that it means that like there's a long-standing history there. Right. So my team, your team is like, it's like pickup basketball. Today I'm on your team and tomorrow I could be on somebody else's team. It's more like a family than that.
Okay.
Right. I mean, Oprah represents to a lot of people a long tradition of not necessarily a politics, but a cultural space. Right. And one that fits fairly neatly into democratic politics, but not super neatly. And so I would say that there is something beyond just sort of team and strategy when you talk about that, like we've been talking about feudal sort of representation, where you have this figure who kind of leads. It's more of a cultural leadership than just a strategic team leadership.
Right. Okay.
Does that make sense? It's a distinction.
Yeah.
Right? And so
I like what you said at first. I like what you said at first about it being you're giving it. It's almost more of a noble sense than the being the reductionist of you're just on their team, and I like that as well. So that's cool. Go ahead. You're saying
I'm
something.
a bit biased growing up in the Boston area, and my mother can name every single Kennedy cousin.
Yeah.
Right. And so. I don't know what that means exactly, but it's not the same as just like team strategy.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Like it's a feeling of real connection, and people have that to Oprah because they feel like they know her.
Right.
Like, and not like they think that she's going to execute a plan that will get me to the next step necessarily. And I think Kennedy's got a little bit of that, partially just because of his name, but also he embodies it. He looks the part, and he also embodies a certain. Look, the guy has followed the steps that traditionally you follow to be in a position of power. Now, we might find that to be a problem because those steps are pretty limited in who can follow them.
Right.
But there's comfort in those steps.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think, Matt, the problem is that the Democratic Party hasn't realized it, and enough of the Democratic Party establishment hasn't realized it, and I'm afraid that too many in the electorate haven't realized it, that we're actually past that stage now. We're in a post pedigree society, because President Trump, it doesn't even matter what schools he went to. He's presented himself as an oafish moron, right? It's actually
who went to the best schools.
Who went to the
really
best,
both ways.
Right? He went to the best schools, and he comes off as the most ridiculous person that we've ever had in that seat. But it speaks to the ineffectiveness of using those traditional metrics as a way of determining who our leader should be. And if the Democratic Party doesn't catch wind of that, then they're going to present someone who represents the old vanguard of the old way of looking at political leaders and put them up against Donald Trump and lose again in 2020.
Yeah, it goes back to that idea that, again, and I really want to be clear, I think that Congressman Kennedy has a lot more that he can do. But I think in that context, it really was the idea that, yeah, the old way is so obviously better than the current way.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the attitude that the Democratic Party has. Is you have to be such a fool to think that this new way is better than their old way.
Right.
And so,
but that's what's unique. That's what's so unique about this time. It's not that the new way is better. It's that the new way matches the natural culmination of hyperpartisanship. Right. This is like the inevitable outgrowth of partisanship in general. Partisanship leads to hyperpartisanship that leads to this society where, you know, your standard leaders of parties are not even capable of competing with the monster that our society created. I think we're all complicit in the creation of Donald Trump's presidency in that way. So, you know, it's a super virus, and I think we don't have any antibiotics to it's a super bacteria or whatever. Yeah. And we don't have
bacteria and biotics.
Yeah. Well, we don't have the cure for it. With anything that we've ever used previously. We can talk forever about this. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that I think that it is very much, this is a super bacteria, and we don't have anything, but we have all these old, you know, antibiotics that have worked in the past, and we haven't tried them yet on this particular superbiotics, but it's like a very slightly super bacteria. This metaphor is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But like, it's the problem. Oh man, and neither of us know anything about medicine
at all.
But it's like it's that, you know, Kennedy represents an antibiotics that we haven't tried, but is so similar to the previous ones. You can't be all that optimistic it's going to work, but we don't have anything else, right? Or they don't have anything else.
They do not have anything else. They do. And they won't recognize it. They don't want to use the other medicines at their disposal. I'm just going to say medicines because I know so little about medicine. I trust whatever the hell my doctor
right.
says.
And those ones might have side effects, to continue this ridiculous metaphor, right? there might be... But there might be other things out there that they do have, like, you know, really reconsidering the electorate considerably, like about getting out the vote and who you know, instead of changing minds, trying to activate people who are not politically engaged, or these like, and these would be like experimental medicines.
Right. But in this case, it would be the obvious. You know, it's like you're sitting in the middle of a virus and don't even realize we're going to stop the metaphor there. We're sitting in the middle. I was really enjoying us fumbling with it. we were struggling with it, weren't we? But we're sitting, particularly me, we're sitting in the middle of a problem, and we're looking at the obvious solution of engaging more people in the electorate, and we're like, no thanks. Let's just keep doing what we've been doing. Professor Matt, thanks so much for hanging out with me this morning. Definitely an important conversation, and I hope a lot of people get a chance to listen to it.
Yeah, no, it's fun, Ben. We'll talk more about it, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks as always for tuning in to the podcast. Thanks to Professor Matt Sienkiewicz of Boston College for sitting in with me. It's always a pleasure to have him on the show. Thank you to all the patrons who supported this month. We can't do it without you. Go to patreon.com/the BPD show and become a member. Be sure to check us out at 4 o'clock today for Like It or Not, 4 o'clock every day. Like It or Not with Benjamin Dixon and Rebecca Azor. I will see you tomorrow. Take care.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.